They say the fight game doesn't have a memory. It only has a hunger. It eats legends, it chews up prospects, and it demands blood in exchange for legacy. But every once in a while, the sport stops eating and starts remembering. UFC 326 wasn't just a fight card. It was a ghost story, 11 years in the making. We were promised a war in Saskatoon back in 2015, a clash between Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway that fate decided to steal from us with a freak esophageal tear. We waited a decade. We watched them build Hall of Fame careers on opposite sides of the fence. And when the cage door finally locked behind them in Las Vegas, we thought we knew what we were watching. We were wrong. We tuned in expecting a violent striking masterclass for the BMF belt, a title reserved for the grittiest, nastiest fighters on the roster. What we got instead was a psychological dismantling so profound it didn't just end a fight, it ended an era. But before the Brazilian Bronx could reclaim his throne, the canvas had to be stained by one of the weirdest, darkest, and most chaotic undercards in modern history. Because if the main event was a tragedy, the prelims were a horror movie, and the opening scene didn't start with a knockout, it started with a bucket. To understand the sheer magnitude of what happened in the main event, you have to understand the energy in the building leading up to it. T-Mobile Arena felt different. It wasn't electric, it was anxious. There was a heaviness in the air, the kind that settles in when the crowd realizes that tonight isn't about fun fights. It's about survival. And nothing captured that desperate, ugly survival instinct quite like the absolute fever dream. That was Cody Garbrandt versus Xiaolong. Cody Garbrandt. No love, the man who once danced on Dominic Cruz and looked like the future of the sport. Watching him now feels less like watching a sport and more like watching a car crash in slow motion. We knew he was fighting for his career. We didn't know he was fighting his own body. The fight started with the usual speed, the usual flash, but by the time the third round opened, the technical masterpiece we expected had devolved into a grotesque theater of the absurd. It wasn't the punches that stopped the crowd's hearts. It was the frantic waving of referee Herb Dean, one low blow, then a second. The rhythm was shattered, but then the cameras caught something that usually stays in the locker room. Garbrandt, a former world champion, a man who has touched gold, was leaning over a bucket in his corner, violently ill, vomiting while his coaches screamed instructions he probably couldn't even hear. It was visceral. It was ugly. It was the unpolished, unglamorous reality of a weight cut gone wrong and a body that is screaming, "Enough." And yet, he fought. That's the twisted beauty of this game. Even when you are physically purging, you are expected to perform. But the win didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a narrow escape from a burning building. The judges gave him the nod. The crowd gave a confused applause. And just like that, the tone for UFC 326 was set. Nothing tonight is going to be clean. Nothing tonight is going to be pretty. If Garbrandt was the chaos, what happened next was the cold, clinical execution of the old guard. We talk about passing the torch in MMA like it's a respectful ceremony. It's not. It is a violent robbery. Rob Font walked into the cage against Raul Rosas Jr., looking to teach the 21-year-old kid a lesson about levels. Font has been in the trenches with the scariest strikers on the planet. He has a jab that can rearrange faces. But within 60 seconds, the uncomfortable truth settled over the arena like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't a fight. It was a feeding. Rosas didn't just win, he erased Rob Font. He didn't strike with him. He didn't play the veteran's game. He grabbed him, dragged him into deep water, and held him there until the bubbles stopped coming up. It wasn't flashy. It was terrifyingly easy. For 15 minutes, we watched a man who has spent a decade refining his craft get completely nullified by a kid who can't even rent a car without a surcharge. The silence during that fight was deafening. It was the sound of the audience realizing that the experience we value so much doesn't matter when you're facing a generational grappling anomaly. Font looked helpless against the cage, his eyes scanning for an exit that Rosas had already bricked up. By the time the decision was read, nobody was cheering for the winner. They were just mourning the loser. The Blessed Era was the headline, but the Problem Child era had quietly, violently begun on the undercard. But the violence wasn't done escalating. The night demanded a sacrifice, a true moment of finality to wash the taste of the decision fests out of our mouths. Enter Drew Dober and Michael Johnson. These are two guys who have been fighting since the Obama administration. They are the relics of a lighter weight class, the gatekeepers of violence. When they stepped in, it felt like a loser leaves town match. The stakes were implicit but heavy. For a round and a half, Michael Johnson looked like he had found a time machine. His hands were fast, his footwork was slick. He was touching Dober up, dancing around the power, looking for all the world like the man who once beat Dustin Poirier. And then, the cruelest rule of combat sports asserted itself. You can win every single second of a fight, right up until the moment you lose everything. Dober didn't set up a trap. He didn't craft a master plan. He just planted his feet, bit down on his mouthpiece, and threw a left hand that carried the weight of 1,000 gym wars. The sound of the impact cut through the noise of the crowd. It was the sound of a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. Johnson didn't crumple. He stiffened. He fell like a tree in a forest, completely disconnected from his senses before he even hit the canvas. It was one of those knockouts that makes you look away. One minute, Johnson is reviving his career. The next, he is staring at the lights, wondering what year it is. Dober stood over him, not with malice, but with relief. He survived. That's all this sport allows you to do. You don't win, you just survive to the next paycheck. So, we had the sickness with Garbrandt. We had the suffocation with Rosas. We had the sudden death with Dober. The table was set. The crowd was bloodthirsty, anxious, and buzzing with a weird, frantic energy. But the co-main event was about to provide the kind of drama you can't script. A moment where the physiology of a fighter is pushed past the breaking point and sheer will is the only thing keeping them upright. Caio Borralho versus Rainier de Ridder was supposed to be a grappler's chess match, a high-level, technical display of jiu-jitsu between the new breed of middleweight and the former one championship king. But chess match implies rules. Chess match implies order. What we got was a street fight in 4-ounce gloves. Early in the fight, it happened. A knee, a stray bone-on-bone collision to the groin that echoed through the arena. We've all seen low blows. Usually, a fighter takes 5 minutes, grimaces, and gets back to it. But Borralho went down like he'd been shot. The replays were wince-inducing. The crowd hushed. This was the kind of foul that ends fights, the kind of foul that results in a no contest and sends everyone home angry. For 3 minutes, Borralho writhed on the canvas. The doctor came in. The ref hovered. The air left the building. We were looking at another anticlimactic end, another what if to add to the pile. And then something shifted in Borralho's eyes. He didn't just recover. He got angry. He stood up, waved the doctor away, and decided that he wasn't going to just win this fight. He was going to punish de Ridder for the inconvenience. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in weaponized rage. Borralho didn't just grapple, he mauled. He took de Ridder down and treated him like an unruly child. He battered him with ground and pound that felt personal. Every strike seemed to say, "You tried to take the easy way out, so now I'm going to make you take the hard way home." 30-27, 30-27, 30-27. A shutout. Borralho proved that the middleweight division has a new shark swimming in the deep end, one that can take the dirtiest shots in the game and convert that pain into fuel. But as Borralho's hand was raised, the screens in the arena shifted, the lights dimmed, the music changed, the undercard was over, the violence, the vomit, the knockouts, it was all just prologue. The real story was walking toward the curtain. Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira, the BMF title. The narrative going in was simple, almost lazy. Max is the boxer, Charles is the grappler. If it stays standing, Max wins. If it hits the floor, Charles wins. Every analyst, every pundit, every fan repeated this mantra. It was safe. It was logical. It was based on a decade of evidence. But Charles Oliveira didn't come to Las Vegas to be logical. He came to break a curse. He came to rewrite the script that was written for him back in 2015. And as the opening bell for the main event rang, he did something that made the entire arena hold its breath. He didn't pull guard. He didn't throw a flying knee. He walked to the center of the cage, looked the best boxer in the UFC dead in the eye, and changed the rules of the game forever. The bell rang, and in that first first 5 seconds, the entire narrative of the lightweight division collapsed. We expected Charles Oliveira to be the aggressor, sure, but we expected the Charles Oliveira we've known for 15 years, the Muay Thai wrecking machine, the guy who walks forward like a zombie, eats 3 punches to give 1, and creates chaos until someone falls over. We expected him to trade in the pocket with the best boxer in the UFC. It was the only way this fight made sense. Max Holloway is a volume striker. You have to beat him at his own game or catch him in the transitions. But Charles didn't want to play a game. He wanted to end an argument. 30 seconds in, no feeling out process, no touch of gloves. Charles changes levels. Not a desperate diving shot like we saw against Islam Makhachev. This was a power double leg, a collegiate-style blast double that put the BMF champion on his back before the crowd could even process the visual. T-Mobile Arena went quiet, not the silence of boredom, the silence of confusion. We were watching a man known for his guard-pulling and dynamic submissions suddenly look like a Dagestani wrestler in a Brazilian jersey. This was the twist. Round 1 was a revelation. Max Holloway has legendary takedown defense. He has hips that have frustrated wrestlers for a decade, but he wasn't fighting a wrestler, he was fighting a ghost. Charles was heavy. He was suffocating. He wasn't hunting for submissions, he was hunting for control. He held Max down with a brute strength we haven't seen since the days of Khabib. He was grinding his forearm into Max's face, smothering the cardio, draining the blessed energy bar with every passing second. When the horn sounded to end the first round, Max stood up slowly. He looked at his corner, and for the first time in years, there was doubt in his eyes. He wasn't tired physically. He was tired existentially. He realized that the fight he prepared for, the striking war, the stand and bang, was a lie. Charles had tricked him. Charles had tricked us all. Round 2, same story. Max tried to box. He tried to create angles. He threw that signature jab. Charles slipped it, ducked under, and dumped him again. It was becoming clinical. It was becoming inevitable. The commentary team started to run out of superlatives for Max's toughness and started searching for words to describe his helplessness. You could feel the air leaving the balloon. The crowd wanted a brawl. They were getting a burial. By round 3, the twist had become the new reality. The BMF belt, a title created to celebrate violence, blood, and grit, was being won with position, pressure, and patience. Charles Oliveira, the man critics called a quitter, the man they said breaks when it gets hard, was mentally breaking the toughest man in the sport. He wasn't quitting. He was enforcing his will. He was telling Max Holloway, "You don't get to fight today. You only get to survive." Rounds 4 and 5 were a formality, a procession. Max Holloway is too tough to be finished, but he isn't too tough to be neutralized. He spent the championship rounds with his back against the fence. Charles draped over him like a wet blanket, landing short elbows, controlling the wrists, and watching the clock tick down on a legacy-defining performance. When the final bell rang, there was no tension. There was no holding of breath. We knew the scorecards before Bruce Buffer even picked up the microphone. 50 to 45, 50 to 45, 50 to 45. Unanimous, dominant, a shutout. Charles Oliveira didn't just win the BMF belt, he redefined it. He proved that being a bad motherfunner isn't about how many punches you can take. It's about how completely you can render another dangerous man harmless. It's about taking the scariest striker of his generation and turning him into a novice. And then came the payoff. Usually, the BMF belt presentation is full of posturing, chest bumping, mean mugs for the camera. But as Dana White wrapped that black and silver strap around Oliveira's waist, the facade cracked. The Do Bronx persona dissolved. Charles dropped to his knees in the center of the cage, and he wept. These weren't the tears of joy. These were the tears of exorcism. For 11 years since that night in Saskatoon in 2015, Charles has carried the weight of what if? What if his esophagus hadn't torn? What if he had fought Max back then? Would he be the GOAT? Would he be the champion sooner? Tonight, he didn't just answer those questions, he violently erased them. He looked at his family, his son, his father, his team, who had rushed the cage, and the emotion was raw. It was uncomfortable to watch because it was so real. We saw a man who had been written off, mocked, and doubted, standing at the pinnacle of the sport, holding a belt that symbolizes pure grit while sobbing like a child. It was the most human moment in the history of the BMF title. It stripped away the marketing and the bravado and showed us exactly what this sport takes from you. It takes your soul, piece by piece, until nights like this give it back. But of course, in the UFC, you don't get to enjoy the moment for long. The vultures are always circling. Before Charles had even wiped the tears from his eyes, the notification bells were already ringing. The internet doesn't sleep, and neither do the rivals. Dan Hooker, the Hangman, a man who has never met a fight he didn't like and never met a microphone he didn't abuse. While the world was celebrating Oliveira's emotional vulnerability, Hooker was on Twitter, typing out the sentence that would launch the next great lightweight war. Is a BMF supposed to cry like that? Asking for a friend. It was petty. It was cruel. It was exactly what the sport needed. In one sentence, Hooker shifted the narrative from coronation to conflict. He poked the bear. He took a moment of pure triumph and stained it with mockery. And just like that, the machinery of the UFC started turning again. The fans saw the tweet. The media saw the tweet. Charles saw the tweet. The blessed era might be over, but the Hangman arc has just begun. Charles Oliveira didn't respond with a tweet. He responded in the press conference with a look that said, "You're next." And if tonight showed us anything, it's that when Charles Oliveira decides you're next, you don't get to fight, you don't get to box, you get dragged into the deep water, and you get drowned. So where does that leave us? UFC 326 wasn't the card we expected. It was a card of uncomfortable truths. We learned that Cody Garbrandt is fighting a battle he can't win against his own biology. We learned that Raul Rosas Jr. is a terrifying problem that the bantamweight division isn't ready to solve. We learned that Drew Dober still has a left hand from hell. And we learned that Charles Oliveira is the most complete, most dangerous, and most emotional fighter to ever hold the BMF belt. The curse of Saskatoon is broken. The what if is dead. There is only what now. And if Dan Hooker really wants to find out what a crying BMF feels like, he might just get his wish sooner than he thinks, because in this game, tears dry fast, but blood stains forever.